Case. So if you could just give us, and I'll call on, let's see, I'll call on Case first and then Pat. Can you just give us a little background on your business and, the succession planning that's taken place through each of the first three generations and kind of where you're headed with the next generation?
Yeah, sure. So I've only been a part of the previous transition and the current transition that we are in process of right now. But our business dates back to 1957. My wife's grandfather, Russ Fiorella, started the Smokestack Barbecue in Kansas City in 1957. His son, Jack, was 16 years old at the time and started working in the business. Jack later took control of the Smokestack brand, and then we eventually transitioned to Jack Stack Barbecue. But that happened over a period of about 30 years. Jack was a brilliant businessman and entrepreneur, and in the early 90s, he realized that he needed to do something to set up some structure for life after his leadership in our business. And so he very insightfully got some professional partners together and set up a 15-year plan for my brother-in-law and myself to purchase the business from him. And it went, really well for the early years of it. And towards the end, as things got a lot closer, it got pretty tough. So we learned a lot of lessons through that first transition that we're trying to improve on in the current transition that we're in. But we have a pretty complex business. We operate 9 different operating entities. We have 950 employees. There's a lot of moving parts to our organization. Currently, I have stepped into the chairman role. We have a non-family CEO at the moment who is continuing to develop my two oldest sons, who are now in the business with us, and beginning the process of transitioning ownership to them. So that's kind of where we're at today, and many lessons learned along the way that I'm happy to share as we go through this. So
great. Thanks, Case. Pat, you want to tell us your story?
Sure. First of all, Case, I love the smell of your barbecue. But growing up, we learned to love the smell of asphalt even more.
Yeah.
So that's the business my dad started in 1954. Started out with driveways, and you move up to parking lots, and all of a sudden you're doing city work. So we went from dad started off with a few employees and then brought his brother along and made him 50% partner, my Uncle John. And we just slowly grew the business. And now we're into municipal work and county work, primarily road overlays, new streets, new subdivisions, work like that. And we've gone from, like I said, a few employees to well over 100 employees now. We'll do north of, I think, 50 million this year. See what I went through. So I joined the business in 78. And about 10 years later, we started that transition. We implemented the transition. Like Case, we started working on it for years and years. We got attorneys involved. We got an accountant involved, how to do it best. And then I think Sean's gonna ask me later. But so I went through the first succession plan, and then we just went through the second. So into the third generation now.
All right, Pat. So I guess I'm going to have you go a little deeper. Tell the story about what happened, because this is kind of, honestly, it has been a cautionary tale for my brother and me, and for maybe some of the others who are watching. And I really appreciate Pat being kind enough to share this story with us. But I think that it's something that we can all learn from. So tell us what happened with your dad and your uncle.
Well, they were very tight and did everything together, and we always had family outings and Easter and on and on and on. And it was just a great relationship. But as the kids, my generation, got older and we were ready to step into taking over the business, it turned out that there was I had 3 brothers and a brother-in-law, so there's 5 on our side, and my uncle had 1 son working the business. We decided at the time in the mid 80s to split it all evenly. So each kid, each son, whatever, son-in-law would get 1/6, right? First year, bonuses paid out. We took the money and paid part the stock off to start the purchase. Second year, Uncle John said, no, I want my son to be 50% owner. And turned into a lawsuit, McAnany versus McAnany, split the families up. My other uncles came in to try to negotiate, compromise and, reasoning and all that. Just didn't work out. So it was really unfortunate because then John took his son and started another paving business, McAnany Paving. And then there's McAnany Construction. It all turned out fine after many years, where McAnany Paving closed down and Ted shut down the business. But it's a really strong lesson for me. My dad was a pretty dominant guy, and he pretty much, said, this is how we're going to do it. And at one point in time, John just said no. And I really attribute it to my dad not having good communication skills with his younger brother and just airing it out well beforehand about the wisdom of 1/6 versus sending his one son to be a 50% owner and not really being fair to that son, really, to put that burden on him. I didn't think was right. I mean, there's a lot of lessons here, but the communication to me is the most important thing. Well before using the pros and cons. Look, here's what's best for your family. Here's what's best for my family. Let's come to a compromise now. Let's start walking through the issues. There are going to be family dynamics, brothers and sisters, but I think honesty and strong communications years before you really want to execute this plan is the most important thing.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And I know, so you went down from 3 brothers, so 5 of you guys, down to 2 with the next generation. So is that just because that was the candidates that were interested in running the business, or?
Well, no, it looked like it was going to end up with around 10. And but after several years of the cousins working together, more and more of them dropped out. And so it worked out well. So it was kind of that best scenario in my mind. You go from 2 to 6, back to 2. The complexities with 5 or 6 or 7, to me, it can be unbearable. And then, Sean, you and I have talked about this, but then whether or not to give stock to non-working kids, that's a big issue for me. You can cut it both ways, but that's one you have to look at as well. How can you take care of the kids that are not in the business, right? Do you want to give them stock or not stock? That's a big issue, and one that we always said, if you're not working, no stock. We're going to take care of you in other ways,
Yeah. Well, and I know, Fletcher, you've got a process that you kind of advocate, and you're taking my brother Matt and I through that right now. And it's honestly, it's been awesome, really, because you hit on all the right questions. You really don't waste a lot of time, but maybe you can talk about and even reflect on some of the issues that Pat's had to deal with through the 2 transitions they've gone on.
Yeah, and maybe let's put a little framework around the conversation that we're having, that Pat's experienced, that Case is experiencing. And so as we take a step back and we talk about exit planning, well, there's a process here. And so what I want to share with everyone is that there's a process. And the most important thing you can do today is to think about and start to work through what are your exit objectives. And every owner has objectives. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But as I stay focused on the process for a second, there are 7 steps to this exit planning process. And they begin with you, the business owner. And every owner's got a core set of objectives. And your objectives, your ideas drive the exit planning process. And so the sooner you can start thinking about this, I think the further along you can get, what we've already heard from Pat and Case is we started this process a long time ago. So time is very important in the process. The sooner you can begin, the better. And the first thing to do is to say, well, what are my objectives? What am I trying to accomplish? And every owner has 3 core exit objectives. And then beyond that, there may be a lot, right? But the first 3 that we always want to focus in on are, number 1, how much longer do you want to work in your business versus own it? And every owner's got a different timeline for ownership versus operations, right? So some owners may want to take a step back and continue to own the business, and some owners may say, "No, I'm ready to get out." So start to think about, well, how much longer do you want to own your business versus operate it? And the second one is, well, how much cash do you need to receive from the sale or transfer of your business to maintain your lifestyle going forward, to go live your best life? And for some owners, that could be a lump sum. So if I transition my business to say my kids or my key employees, I'd like them to buy me out. And so I need X amount of dollars net of tax to maintain my lifestyle forever. Or you could say, I need an annual income stream. And so if Pat or Case may say, listen, I'd like to receive a couple $100,000 indefinitely until I pass away. And so whatever that number is, we want to start to define that. And working with a good financial planner, I think, is something that's critically important in the process, because that person can help you say, here's the dollar amount that you need to maintain your existing spend and your lifestyle going forward. I will tell you that all the clients that I work with, I have probably half of them say, oh, I won't spend that much once I'm not working. Not true. You still spend the same amount, right? It's very difficult to pare it back. So, you continue to spend the same amount. And then the third one is, well, who do you want to transfer the business to?
Yeah.
And this is where complexity comes into play, right? Especially with family or insider transfers. And so I have a lot of clients who will say, let's create a priority, right? And so number 1, I'd like to transition my business to my family members. And if they need some support, then maybe I can ask my key employees to help in the process. And then the conversation becomes, well, do you want your key employees to also become business owners? And some family members say, some owners say, yes, I'm comfortable with that. Others say, no, I'd like to just to keep the stock inside of my family and create a family perpetuation plan. And so today, I think that's what I'd like to focus in on, is talking about the creation of what a family perpetuation plan looks like. And so the first step is, well, what do you want? What are you trying to achieve? Right? How much longer do you want to work in the business versus own it? How much cash do you need, and who do you want to transition the business to? And then the second step is, well, what do you have? What's the value of your business? What does the cash flow projection look like? And what do your current personal assets look like? And that's where we tend to see a gap between what do I want and what do I have? And through the exit planning process, our goal is to close that gap, to equalize this. And we can do that in a variety of different ways. There are a couple of terms that you'll hear today, like value drivers is one of them. Value drivers are a set of characteristics that private equity looks for when they want to buy a business. And that doesn't mean that you want to sell your business to a third party, but what that does mean is implementing value drivers into your business is a great way to get your management team focused on increasing the value of the company and to create a path for your incoming, say, family to run on, to say, if my son was coming into this business, his name is John, I would say, John, I've got a couple of value drivers that I'd like you to implement, and here's the path. This is the path that I'd like you to travel. What that allows me to do as a parent and as a business owner is to evaluate his performance. Can he implement the value drivers? Is he hitting the benchmarks and the targets that we're looking for? How is he working with the other team members inside of the organization, right? Where is his path inside of this business? And I think an important statement to make right now is that business ownership does not equate to leadership, right? So you can have owners inside of the business who are not necessarily leaders. That's okay. And that can work well. You can also have owners inside of the business who are strong leaders and who will lead this business. The key is to determine, where does that child's skill set lie? So that comes out in step 3, and that comes out in step 4, and how we start to transition the business over to insiders. And then step 5 is typically, for a lot of my clients, the fallback. If we can't successfully transition this business to an insider, then maybe we should go to market, because it's usually easier to divide up cash than it is to divide up shares of a company, right? But that's usually the fallback. And so I want to stay focused on family perpetuation planning, transitioning the business to an insider, because I do think that we have a variety of clients where that's happened and it's very successful, but it does take time. And then step 6 and 7 to round this out. Step 6 is business continuity. What happens if? And that what happens if is really an important discussion to have with yourself internally. What happens if something happens to you? Do you have the executive team in place, the leadership team, the management team to be able to pick up where you left off? And so the question that I always ask is, can you turn off your computer, take a vacation for 3 months, no cell phone calls, no emails, and come back? And is your company running better than when you left it? And if it is, you've got a strong management team and you've got good continuity in place. If it's not, we've got to address that. Right? And then step 7 is personal wealth planning and estate. And Pat mentioned this earlier. He said, well, I think his statement was, how do we create some equalization between business active kids and non-business active kids? And how do we treat them fairly, right? And fair also, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean equal. And so you could have some children who are involved in the business and they may receive more shares versus others who are not. And there are a lot of planning ideas around that we can get into. But I think what's most important to hear is that we can very easily balance. This is something Todd can talk to also. We can very easily balance the estate of the business owner to create some equality across children who may be active in the business and who may not be active in the business. So there's a well-defined planning process to take. There's a path that we take clients down. And ultimately, we know this path leads to success because it's based upon your objectives. And so the takeaway, if I come full circle here, is to really focus in on what are you trying to accomplish? What's in your hearts of heart desire? What do you want to do? How much longer do you want to work in the business? Who do you want to transition it to? How much cash do you need to get? And then what comes on top of that? I have plenty of owners who say, I want my business to remain in Kansas City. I don't want it to leave. So I don't want to sell it to a third party. I'd like my business to continue to support a variety of initiatives that I've put in that don't necessarily generate revenue, but they create community involvement. They provide additional opportunities for individuals within my community. And those are important to me as an individual and as a person. And I want my company to continue to support that. So lots of objectives. The key is to start to write them down and to talk about them. And so the last thing that I'll say is, as you think about your objectives, talk to your family too. Talk to your spouse, talk to your significant other about what you're thinking about and what you want to achieve, because that person also has significant influence and input.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Fletcher. Todd, what's been your experience? I know you work with lots and lots of business owners. What have you seen that has worked, and where have you seen people get tripped up?
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's been some really great points have been made already. I think one of the key issues is, and Fletcher mentioned this, is just get started. Get started thinking about it. Get started communicating. Get started planning. Because so many times we've seen with business owners that they keep deferring those discussions, that planning. And the longer they wait, the way I look at it, the less options they have. Yeah. So do you want to make a plan and be in control and have as many options as you can? Or if you keep waiting, and ultimately at the end, someone else is going to make the decisions for you, which is not going to be the best case for you, your family, or the business. Another thing that was mentioned was just the value of the business. That's an area where folks really struggle with. We're all guilty of our own business, our own things, thinking what the value is versus what the market thinks it is. And so I think you really need to be educated, and whether it's having an evaluation, do market studies. There's lots of different ways you can come up with what the value of your business is. So I really encourage people to be realistic about that and get as much information as they can, so that, again, you're making educated decisions, as part of your planning process. Another thing I would mention too is we talked about cash flow. Obviously, cash flow of the business owner. You also want to think about the cash flow of the business itself, especially if there's going to be payments coming from the business to the owners as part of a buyout. So many times, the right planning hasn't been done really to evaluate, okay, what's the cash flow needs of the business as it grows, as it continues to expand new markets, new products, new territories, and what the cash flow of those requirements are, in addition to any of the cash flow payments that we need to say to buy out, existing owners. So those are just some of the things that people really should, be thinking about, and starting the process as early as they can.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So Case and Pat, I know you guys have worked with advisors, and Case, you're still in the process. What are some of the key advisors that you've used through the process of coming up with a good transition plan? Yeah, Case,
so,
go ahead.
First and foremost for us, we engaged with Bill High, who is with the Signatory here in town, and used Bill to facilitate our family business discussions and the topic of family business transition. So we brought in Bill specifically to get our family together as a family to decide and agree on what was most important to our family and what we really wanted for the future of our family and the future of this business, and to come to consensus on that, and then to build some framework for how we communicate as a family, the regular kind of rhythm that we would communicate as a family, how we handle tough discussions as a family, and then we went further than that and came up with really how do you enter the business? What are the rules of the road for entering the business? So Bill was incredibly helpful and instrumental in that part of the process for us, and I really recommend bringing in somebody, if it's a Fletcher or a Bill High, or somebody who can facilitate with your family, so that it's not the family leader coming in and telling the rest of the family how this process is going to work. It's much more effective if you can get buy-in, if it can be the family's decision and not an individual's decision. So I highly recommend that. Clearly, we engaged our financial planning group and really built our trusts around how we wanted to, in the most tax efficient manner possibly, get this process started, and then come up with a plan to do it in a very tax efficient way. So those two groups, clearly we brought in our accounting professionals and some legal professionals along the way as well to help us with documentation and how we work through that process. So I think those are, four really key advisors, maybe a facilitator, a financial advisor, a tax professional, and a legal professional to help with the process.
Terrific. What else did you do, Pat?
Well, we did those things, not quite at that high of a level, I would say, but get the professional help. There's no doubt about that. People say, "Oh, you've done so well." I'm like, we hired good people. We hired good accounting firm, good legal firm to get us through the sequence and to be a voice of reason, that outside voice that, Todd and Fletcher and Case have mentioned. The other thing the other thing that I would add, though, is that none of those people, the professionals, know your family as well as you do. And that's where I think it really hits the road. That do you have the sons and daughters to be able to do well in this next generation? So often I've seen families turn one generation to the next, and that next generation was not going to be able to run the business, and it went down fast. So really making a strong analysis, and that comes from the person, that comes from your spouse. Say, do we really want to put this on our son or daughter? So that's kind of the other part of the equation that says, okay, we do have the next generation who can handle the business, that can work well with siblings, if there's other siblings or cousins. That's kind of the X factor that I would kind of throw into the mix besides the professional help.
Yeah, I would add to that, there are a lot of assessment tools that we use as a family that you can use. I mean, StrengthsFinders, Culture Index, there are some professional assessment tools. Holweg has an exceptional executive assessment tool to give you a unbiased version of your child's capability or a family member's capability to actually lead and run a complicated organization. So there's a lot of tools out there that can help you and help your kids realize where their limitations might be, right? Because they may not be aware of their limitations at this point, and those tools can help them be more self-aware.
Absolutely. Yeah. Did you guys have any rules? I know we had a rule within our company that you had to work somewhere else for a couple of years before you came on board. Did anybody else have that?
Our rule is just you need to know how to shovel asphalt. That's pretty much it. But
Well, if you
I
can
think
be out in the field and still want to come into the office, that's saying a lot.
you need to be able to handle 100-degree heat on top of asphalt. But no, seriously, I always think it depends on the son or daughter. And I think it is a good idea to think about having them work someplace else. But sometimes not. It again, it comes down to the kid. I think each circumstance. But I am a big believer in the son and daughter kind of knowing all aspects of the business. That we're just not going to make you. I got my degree in business from KU and walked up to my dad and said, "Dad, what do you want me to do?" And I was thinking he was going to give me some good office job. He goes, "Why don't you go out and be a mechanic?" And I'm like, I had no mechanical skills at all, but it helped me to learn, what those guys went through out in the field when something broke down. So that was not my MBA, but that was a class I needed to take or something I needed to do to have that experience.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Our basic premise that we have in the employment guidelines is you need to go to college, you need to get at least a bachelor's degree, and you need to go work somewhere else professionally for a period of 2 to 5 years. But we leave open special circumstances. So if we have a child who's only interested in doing what we're doing, and they say, "I don't want to go do anything else. This is all I've ever wanted to do," and they want to come in and take a ground floor position and try to learn the business from the inside, then we leave that open. But the general guidelines are, you got to get your degree. You have to go work for someone else for a period of time. And then when you come into the business, we all enter the business at the same level, and we all enter the business in an entry-level position. And, I have sons who have been in professional life for 5 years, 7 years, who come into the business, and guess what? They get a hat and an apron, and they're back in the kitchen, serving beans with the rest of the team, and learning our business from where it starts. So
That's good.
That's awesome. And I know it seems, I don't know if you, Pat, it sounds like you did this, and I know Case, you've done this, and we did this here at the Miller Group, particularly with Amber, who's now the CEO. She worked in every division in our company. And I particularly like to throw her into challenging situations just to see how she would handle it. And she always rose to the occasion and did a really great job. So I don't know if you look for opportunities like that to move them on a path, or how that would work.
For us, again, a little bit more simple. It was like you throw me or one of the owner's sons out to a paving crew, you are going to get harassed all day long. And if you can't handle that, I mean, these are tough guys, and they are going to grind on you and laugh at you if you can't do the work, and be tough on you. And so that was our test. I mean, can you work with those people? Can you respect them at the same time and know that they're good, hardworking people, and earn their respect? So it was kind of an easy test case. Either you can handle those kind of blue collar workers, or you can't. And also, though, for me is to know that they've got they're out there working hard. You better respect them.
Yeah.
All right.
So I agree, Sean. I think giving a diverse exposure to the business is really important. And I also agree that, getting in there and working with your frontline employees gives them a chance to understand your work ethic, gives you a chance to respect what it is that they do every day and how hard they work every day to be successful at their work, and then gives them a chance to make a determination on you. I mean, they can judge whether you'd be a good leader for them or not. They're gonna watch everything you do. As Pat said, when you come into a family business, you are under the microscope. Everybody is watching you. Everybody is paying attention to everything you say and everything you do, and it all matters. And And we try to communicate that very clearly to any family member that's interested in coming into the business, and make sure they're well prepared to be in that setting and under that microscope. So
Totally agree. I give what I call the Dutch uncle talk to each one of them before they come in, and just say, look, you got to work twice as hard as everybody else, because everybody's looking at you. You may not realize it, and you're going to end up being buddies with a lot of these people, but they're always watching, to see how hard you're going to work, and to see, and to be humble too. I think,
yes.
that's one of the things I've always admired about you, Pat, is how you have handled situations. And if you could elaborate a little bit on, because we were having this conversation, and, I think you recognize that each person in the business, and in this case, each family member, might have certain skills and abilities in that, and how to deal with that. Because I think, sometimes it will fall on, and I've even told Amber this. I said, there's some times where you're going to seem like you're carrying the company on your back, and, you might not think it's fair. And guess what? Welcome to the club. That's what happens when you're running a company sometimes. And sometimes they'll be carrying you too, but, you have to be a servant leader and a humble person. So how did you deal with that? Because I know you've had some situations like that.
Well, every family's going to expect in the business, and then some are going to rise up and do well, and some are not. And then you get the circumstances where, a spouse will say, well, this one's not working very hard, or how come you're doing all the work and they're not? And my philosophy was always is, God's given me gifts, and I'll do my best. And I am not going to look down on my brother and say, I may help him to recognize them, to do a better practice or something like that. But at the end of the day, we're just not all created equal. And I'm not going to ride horse on a brother or a cousin or in-law to a degree that just creates a lot of acrimony. I'm not going to put up with dishonesty or anything like that. But I'm telling you, we all know this. Just people are not created equal. Some have different work ethics. And I was always happy to work hard. I just love working. But some other people are not. And I'm just not going to lose a lot of sleep over making demands of somebody who's not going to be able to change their DNA, if you want to call it that. It's to some degree, it's just not possible. And in the long term, I'm doing just fine. And it creates too much acrimony within a family to start jabbing at each other. You got to be very careful with that.
Yeah. And so agree. And so we do a couple things. So one thing that we do in the early process is we've gone through our family meetings and doing some of these assessment tools. We'll step back and we'll say, okay, so this child is created differently than this child. They have different skill sets. They're going to bring different things to the table when it comes to working in the company, and understanding the unique skills and talents of each member of the family, and knowing that we're not going to do things the same or see things the same or respond to things the same all the time is a really important step for everybody to kind of embrace and understand that. And then one of the things that we talk about a lot is there's two great killers of family continuity, and pride and greed are two huge killers. And pride is, as we talk about that as a family, we always say, never overestimate your contribution and underestimate the contribution of another family member or another employee, right? It's really easy for us to look at ourselves and say, I did this, or I did this, or I did this, and minimize somebody else's contribution. But in reality, when we all step back, every contribution is a very important contribution. So we don't want to get into that trap. And then the greed trap is simply, just what it says. It's just expecting more than the value you create, right? I mean, we all create value, but our value it's a shared value. I mean, we're doing it in conjunction with a lot of other people who are working hard, and we can't overestimate what value we create as a part of the team, because without the rest of the team, that value is it's tough to quantify. So we talk about those things openly as a family and frequently, and we're just aware of it. And part of the game is just communicating and being aware that these are the traps that are going to be set for us.
Awesome. Yeah. when you think about transitioning within a family, one of the challenges I think too is just economically from a tax standpoint. You can end up sending half the money off to the government if you're not careful in how you do that. So maybe Todd and Fletcher, can you guys comment a little bit on how internal transitions can be done in a way? Because I mean, if I just sold my stock to my kids or my nieces and nephews, you know, they would have to earn money, pay tax on it, and then they would pay me for the stock, and I would have to pay tax on the gain. And so, how do you efficiently, because the private equity groups kind of have a leg up on us from that regard. So, Todd, can you comment a little on that?
Sure. Yeah. And obviously, there's a number of ways to do the transition. Obviously, selling directly or selling on an installment basis. You know, obviously, gifting is another key mechanism that comes into play, and that is one area we talked about timing and getting started. That is an area that I would call the clock is ticking, as far as there's some opportunities out there right now from a estate tax perspective to really utilize the rules that are in place right now. And I'll just cover this at a high level. So obviously everyone is familiar with income tax. Well, there's also estate tax. And so that's the value of your estate less the exemption amount that the government gives you. So any value of your estate over that amount gets taxed at a state level, which roughly is at about a 40% rate. So obviously pretty good clip. Well, the rules as they are right now, each one of us has approximately a $13 million lifetime exemption. That means any assets that we would have over 13 million would be subject to estate tax. Any amount below the 13 million would not. And you look at it from a husband and wife, a spouse team, you've got 26 million. So obviously that's a sizable amount that you can gift to your heirs without, again, subject to the estate tax. The law that currently is in place is scheduled to sunset. So after 2025, so in 2026, that's basically going to be cut in half. And so obviously that's a big haircut. And really the impact's really on your heirs and your family down the road, as far as, you know, the impact of what's been left on the table if you don't utilize the full 13 million for both the husband and wife. And so the key that we're really talking to clients now is go ahead and do that planning, utilize as much of the gifting as you feel comfortable with, and addressing that now, because if you utilize that before the change or the sunset in the tax law, that's not going to be removed from you. But if you wait and do nothing, at this point, the way the tax law is, basically you're going to lose half of that lifetime exemption. So again, just another reason to be thinking about and doing some planning before that timetable comes into play. You know, and when you're doing gifting and transition, obviously there's a number of things that come into play as far as what's the best structure. And again, there's lots of different methods and approaches you can take. Cash flow is obviously key. Control is key. Many times it's irrevocable as far as what you're setting up. You know, one of the things that we see, even from a control perspective, it works well from a gifting perspective when you have ownership of a business, is really dividing the stock up between voting and non-voting. And then you can gift the non-voting. So you still remain control, but you're getting that value out of your estate. So just, again, there's just some various things that it's really important to get started and start evaluating those, because again, these are big decisions and something that really takes a lot of time to think through, talk through with your family, think through the full ramifications before you make some decisions. And based on the law right now, you're going to want to do that before the end of 2025.
I've got a real picky question on that one. So if you made a gift of, so if it's a 13 million now and it goes down to whatever that would be, you know,
Yes.
6.5 million or something like that. If you gifted 7 million, is your lifetime exemption gone after 25?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
All right. So Fletcher, what would you say in terms of, you know, again, sorry, I muted myself. So efficiently transitioning, you know, internally, some ideas on that as well.
Well, I think ultimately what this comes back to is what are you trying to accomplish? So as Todd mentioned, there are a variety of tools or techniques we can use to create an efficient transition route. Ideally, we're trying to minimize the tax consequence as much as possible, right? That's where we lose value. That's where we lose dollars out of our pocket, is when we have to pay our silent partner here, which is the government, who's participating in this process with us. And so there could be, there could be additional tax tools that we can use, like the gifting exemption. There could be other tools that you could use, like various forms of trusts, whether it's a grant to retained annuity trust, or if you're just giving directly into a trust. Ultimately, what this all comes back to, though, is saying, we've heard this from Pat and Case, which is, and you, Sean, which is, well, what am I trying to achieve, and how can I maintain control of the business until I know the next generation can run it, and how much cash can I get from it, and how is that going to come to me? And that how is it going to come to me is the technical transaction part, right? But how do we get there? How do we communicate what that looks like? That's the creation of the objectives and writing down your goals and desires and clearly communicating that with your team. So that's the business perpetuation plan, if you will. And so the way that I look at this is really twofold. One is in the third thing that we need in this transaction, if you will, is a good corporate planning attorney, right? To come up with a shareholders agreement. And that's going to give us guidelines on how we sell stock or transition stock, who's it going to go to? So, how do we get it back if something happens, so on and so forth. But that shareholders agreement is a technical planning document. And how I equate this is, we all need one. It's kind of like registration for a car, right? We all have to register our cars. We all have to say, this is the value of our car, and we're going to renew the registration every year. But nobody taught that same entity, the DMV, didn't teach us how to drive our car. We had to learn how to do that. And it's the same with our business. When we create a family business perpetuation plan, we're teaching the next generation how to come in and how to operate to their level or to their ability, wherever that is inside of the organization. And then we can back into, well, what are the technical planning tools that we want to use in order to accomplish our objectives? And so I just wanted to highlight those two things, because what I hear from Case and Pat is a couple of things. What's so important in this process is communication, acceptance, and compassion. And that's what I hear out of Pat and Case. And what I don't hear is direction, hard objectives. You have to do this, otherwise you're not going to participate in the business, right? What I really hear them saying is, well, how are you going to participate? What's the best way for you to do that? And then once we know second generation or third generation, kind of who you are, what's the best way to transition ownership to you? And that goes back to what Todd was saying. There's a variety of ways to do it.
And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking, I was just at lunch with a guy today, and his kids are 8 and 10 years old. So the last thing on his mind is transitioning his business to his kids, and things change so much. And I don't know, in terms of timing, at what point do you think, and any of you guys can jump in on this, to me, it almost seems like your kids have to be in their 20s and 30s, to really seriously consider this path. But what do you think? Because Case, you guys started on a little bit earlier than that. I think when your kids were in college.
Yeah. So, I would tell anybody the time to start planning your succession is now. It's a long process. Your kids may or may not want to participate, and that's okay. But you have to have a leadership succession plan for yourself always, right? You should always. My father-in-law used to scream it to the rafters: replace yourself, replace yourself, replace yourself. Right? He would always tell me, you gotta find somebody else to do your job so you can do the next job. And I think even as a CEO, we have to find our successor. We have to find who's going to do this work next. And there's a development process that has to happen to do that. So I think succession is an ongoing responsibility that comes with ownership and leadership of an organization. And we always need to be thinking about who's next and what's next for our organization. And then, you know, as our kids become old enough to make some informed decisions about what they want for their lives and whether they, you know, want to participate or not participate, then, you know, then we can start having discussions about if that includes family or not, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know how, Pat, when did, and of course it's interesting because, and even our kids came to work at the business when they're in high school and college. They'd work in the summer sometimes, and I'm sure your kids were working out on the cruise when they were in school.
Yeah, I look at it both ways. I see the positives of getting the kids started early in the business, but then I also see the negatives. And I saw some negatives, actually with my cousins, I think, is that they were too much entrenched into the business and didn't have another life or expectancy of what to do in life. And I think it's almost a disservice. I think Case kind of touched on this, but I wanted my kids to be fully developed and love whatever they were going to do, and not say, hey, you got to come into the business. You need to be in the business. And so you have to kind of look at each kid and say, is this really doing that child a service to get involved in a family business? There's so much stuff involved when you're an owner of a family business. And it's like, do you really want that kid to be there? You know, my one son's a teacher. He loves teaching. He'll never make a lot of money, but he has a passion for that. So I just think it's always important to really kind of get to know that son or daughter and say, is this the right thing to do to push him into a business?
Yeah, I agree. Well, Todd and Fletcher, what have you seen where, what part of it are business owners least prepared for? What kind of surprises have you seen along the way?
Yeah, I would say that, that we could do a long session on that. I think first off is just the emotional side of, you know, letting go of that title and letting go of that identity. I think that's a huge adjustment. You know, just think of an example, you know, the CEO that the transition, you know, he said you go from who's who to who's that when you walk into a room. And so, you know, we joke about it, laugh about it, but that is a big thing as far as each of our own identity. So I think just being true to yourself and you know, really thinking through the aspects of that. I think another thing too is really thinking through how is this going to affect, you know, the next generation and, you know, the family and the heirs down the road. Because I think so many times we all get in the moment and thinking about right now and not fully thinking through the true ramifications. Even as simple of just trying to make things as defined as you can. Obviously, you're not going to be able to button down every detail, but I've seen so many situations where there's really got to be divisions on families coming down with something simple as if there's going to be a partial transition over a period of time and what that future value is going to be. And it's seen it over and over again where there wasn't a succinct formula or method or easy and understandable method of calculating what future value is for determining what the proper compensation of that, where that's turned into major issues and major fights because again, everyone's got their own perception of value. So I think just thinking through those aspects of how easy is this for someone to pick up that you know isn't in my shoes right now, 5-10 years down the road, and understand this and implement this with, you know, trying to create as least of amount of issues and conflict for the family.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about your, you know, in terms of what's next. You know, I was blessed. My dad really wasn't a control guy, so he was eager to have his kids run the company and kind of step to the side. But and you see it all the time with these guys that are still 70, you know, 80 years old, and they're still running the business, and they got their 58-year-old son that's, you know, the heir apparent who ought to be considering retirement himself too. So what kind of surprises have you seen with some folks, Fletcher?
You know, I think where surprise typically happens in my practice is upfront with expectations. So I think a lot of owners, when they look to their kids, they already have a predetermined expectation of my son's going to take over, my daughter's going to take over this business. And they say that internally to themselves, and years go by because they don't have the conversation with their kids. And so unless you're asking your kids, do you want to come in? Do you want to work with me? Do you have an interest in learning more about this business? We just don't know. And until we ask the question, we're making an assumption. And so not understanding our kids' aspirations is where I tend to see good intentions take a wrong turn. And so that's really the first area where I see challenges arise. And so really, talking to your kids up front is critically important. And the other thing that I'll say is, and this isn't necessarily something that happens to most people, but it's a potential pitfall. And that is when you think about transitioning out of your business, that doesn't mean it has to happen today. And so don't delay the process because you're saying, well, if I talk about transition, that means I got to do something. That's actually not true. Even if you think about it, even if your takeaway from this webinar is, well, what am I going to do in the future? And what does that look like? You're taking action, but that doesn't mean you have to give up control or transition your business tomorrow. Like this process can take as long as you want it to take. It could happen in a couple of months. You could happen overnight. It could take 12 years. So that timeline is important to know that you get to set it and you get to drive your own car to your own destiny.
Yep.
All right. I'll remind everybody that's watching, if you've got any questions, just go ahead and type them onto the chat line and then we can respond to that. One of the things, and we've touched on this a lot, is kind of the emotions that go along with this and how you manage that. In fact, my brother and I were working with Bill High, and this is before my son came to work in the business, and we kind of got to a point where I wouldn't say we were at each other's throat, but it wasn't going the right direction. And so he even suggested, he goes, yeah, you guys need some professional help here. So we got somebody, I don't know if they were psychologists or what they were, but we went away on a retreat and spent a couple of days with a couple of counselors. And I will say we emerged from that better men. And, it wasn't like everything was perfect, but we kind of had an understanding and we moved forward in a good way. So I don't know if anybody's had experiences like that and how you dealt with those. It's something you kind of have to work on. We get together every week, at least once a week, and just kind of talk about what's going on. And part of it's social and part of it's, within the business. But as we've said many times before, good and consistent communication is really, really important. So I don't know, how have you guys had experiences like that, and what'd you do?
Go ahead, Case.
Well, so yes, and it's guaranteed, right? You're gonna have these emotionally charged conversations working with family and business. There's no guarantee that it won't happen. There's a guarantee that it will happen. So the question is how you prepare yourself to manage that well. And my father-in-law and I, when we were going through the transition, so I'm a little different situation because I'm not his son.
Right.
And he's always treated me like a son, but I'm not his son, and I'm going through this transition with him, and I'm getting ready to take ownership of his baby, something that he's nurtured from the time that he was a young boy to where it was as I was ready to take it over. And I couldn't get to the same emotional place he was at. He was at a very difficult emotional place that Todd did a pretty good job of describing as we're beginning to become less so that others can become more. And I couldn't go to where he was, and he really couldn't get out of where he was to go to where I was. And it became extremely charged situation that we very easily could have not made it through that. And by the grace of God and a lot of prayers and humility on both of our parts, I would say we both had to get much more humble than we had ever been before to get through that. But those are Those are things that are going to be a part of family business. And what we're trying to do to mitigate that the best we can as a family is to create these really open lines of communication early and encourage hard discussions and courageous discussions now while our kids are at a young age. Get used to saying things that nobody else wants to hear, but they need to hear. And so that becomes a healthy dialogue within our family, and not something that we just put off so we can put it off, and it never happens, right? Because that's when it gets really toxic, is when the communication stops.
Yeah, that's well said. Sean, on ours, well, my brother-in-law and I would always joke that we didn't need business degrees. We needed psychology degrees, to run a business. It's like Kay said, it's just guaranteed, not just with the employees, but with, your siblings and all that. And so my acid test, so I didn't really mention the third generation, two brothers and a brother-in-law to transition to my son and nephew. And we had a couple brothers that said, well, I want to, kind of stay on. But my acid test was always, look, what's best for the continuity of this company? And it's not doing me any good to retire now, but it's best to let the third generation start running this business. Wouldn't you agree? Something along those lines. You're fine financially. You need to let go. And there's a whole psychology along that. But to me, it was always, am I doing what's best for the company's continuity? And for the best for the leadership, the new leadership, to be able to step up and to run the business. So just some things that just wasn't, humility, lack of greed, lack of what's best for the team, kind of those parameters to set the table.
Yeah, I think I've talked with some of you guys about this. With our family, we had a really interesting meeting years ago. We had a consultant that was working with us, kind of doing some strategic planning on, where do you want the Miller Group to be in 5 or 10 years? And at some point, I think it was the guy that was in charge of sales and marketing, of course. He goes, well, how big do we want to be? So everybody got their Post-it note, and the consultant slapped them all up on the board. And my brother Matt took me aside and he said, hey, which one of those is yours? He and I had the exact same number, and it was the smallest number on the board by a lot, and that was at the point. And I said, in case we were just talking about this earlier today, because for us, growth at this point is just a lot more work.
Yeah.
But for them, growth's fun, and that, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, it was fun for us to build and grow the company. And so it's exciting to kind of turn it over to them, where they're going to take it to a different place than I even care to go, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, Sean, I'll even add to that as far as the timeline of turning it over. That's an issue that we see many times, where there is a plan in place and there is going to be a set transition or a gradual transition over a period of time. And we've just seen numerous cases where people change their minds at the last minute and don't adhere to the plan that was put into place. And that can really cause a lot of strife, especially, say for the, patriarchs or the matriarchs of the business. Letting go is so hard. And whether that's truly letting go and moving forward with the transition of ownership, or it's truly letting go as far as meddling in, the business decisions and the leadership of the business.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, to follow up to Todd's statement, it's really a question, Sean, for you and Case and Pat, but what did you have to see from the next generation for you three to say, all right, they're ready, they're getting there?
Yeah,
Well,
Pat.
Well, I would say that my father left the business. He started a business, but he left right when he was around 60. And in a sense, we weren't ready, but in a better sense, it's better for me to make a mistake in the business world, and not a horrible mistake, but to learn how to run the business without Pops always being there. So that was what I saw from my father. I am not it's not the perfect time to take over. There never probably is, but let him start running the business. And that's what I did with what I saw with my son and nephew, that they had been there long enough to be able to give them the reins. Should I have stayed there longer? I don't think so. I think you just leave and let them learn to run the business, and hope that they keep the same culture that we thought was important, and that the good citizens, they're good companies for the environment, for our community.
Yeah, so I think for us, Fletcher, it's so one of the rules of the road for coming into our family business is you have to declare it. And we have that there very specifically because we make it clear to everybody, if you don't have a passion for this, if this work isn't in your heart, then don't apply. Don't even think about it, because you're not going to be happy. Nobody's going to be happy with you, and this is not going to be a fit for you. So the first thing that we looked for was their willingness and desire to declare it. And then, having observed my sons through school and through their early employment, post school, just a level of commitment, reliability, dedication to what they were doing, all came into play. And again, they have to start in our world. They have to start at a pretty grassroots level. So then we're watching as they come into the business to see how serious they are about really learning everything that they need to learn each step of the way, or if they're just trying to get through, one spot to get to the next spot. And so those were really the things that we were looking for in them to just indicate to us that yes, they're ready for this. So
yeah, and I can comment on ours because I haven't really talked about from my dad to Matt and me. And somebody actually asked a question about, what happens if the owner of the company passes away, because that is sometimes how transitions take place. My dad did not pass away, but he was diagnosed with cancer and given about 6 months to live. And so he went in, thankfully he lived another 18 years, but he had to have surgery and he was on medication for his cancer for a long time. But he came out of the hospital, and in true Bob Miller form, he goes, I don't think God's going to care how much insurance I sold. So I quit and I'm going to start studying for the final exam. And he said, oh, by the way, here's how much the company's worth, and I'm going to sell to you guys, but I don't really need money. I just want money to give away. So this is actually a perfect strategy if you can pull it off. He gifted the company to us, and then he said, this is how much it's worth. So we made donations into his donor advised fund for the next 10 years equal to that. So he never paid tax on the gain of the value of the company, and we got to tax deduct our purchase, if you will, every single year. So we did that. Now, he literally quit. I mean, he came home from the hospital. He didn't come into the office for a long time. And unfortunately, at that time, he was responsible for almost 50% of the revenue of the company. So within a year, we'd lost a third of the revenue of the company. But we've been able to grow it up quite a bit since then. But we have kind of resolved that we're not going to do it that quickly and exactly in that fashion. So we've kind of given, Amber different positions. We've got everybody's kind of got their seat in the bus. We haven't really talked about this, but all of the Miller family members that work in the company are paid as, we do compensation studies every year, and we fairly pay all of our employees. So they're not paid any more just because their name's Miller. And I personally think that's really important. If they're a shareholder and they get some distributions, then that's a different matter. But in terms of their employment within the company, they're paid based on what they do. So, and I don't know if you guys have seen that as being an issue, Todd and Fletcher, on compensation, but
Yeah, that's a that's a major issue. Just because so many times you see, the extremes or people feeling either they're way underpaid or, or a lot of situations more than not where someone's, being paid and not performing, anything close to what would be required of someone, a third party doing that. So I think that's a great idea to, use compensation studies and market studies for that. Because you're right, it is separate as far as the work they're doing, what they're getting paid for that versus the ownership and anything that would come flowing through from there.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful how you pay your kids when they come into the business. Generally, what I see is the key executive team is older than the kids coming in. So if you're going to pay the kids more than your key executives, and your key executives find out, it's going to be a rub, and we want to avoid that. I think that compensation is Sean. I think that you guys have really done it a pretty good way of saying, come into the business, find out let's understand your skill set and your capability and put you where you're going to succeed, and let's pay you for that, right? And so I think you can derive a fair compensation based on what you're putting into the business. From an ownership perspective, it may be a little different. So if you're giving distributions out and you've got business active kids, they're going to participate in that, but that's different than grossing up their wages and paying them more and creating an imbalance inside of the organization. So there's really, again, if we take a step back, we got to look at it from, there's an ownership group, and that ownership group can participate at a variety of levels inside of the organization. They could be leaders, they could be key executives, somebody in that ownership group could be shoveling asphalt, and they're perfect right there, and that's just fine, right? So there's a level of acceptance around that, and speaking to that and talking to all of the employees about that is important. So the other thing that I heard a lot from Pat, Case, and Sean, you also today, is this is talking about values, right? We haven't necessarily had the values conversation, but each one of you have strong values on what you feel is critically important to drive success with this business. And you've instilled that in the company, you've instilled it in your family members. And so I don't know if we just want to take a minute and talk about that, but that's really when I think about, what are you driving toward as owners, and how are you moving forward in life, and how are you introducing opportunities to your kids and your employees. I think it's all coming from a sense of driving your purpose.
Right. As you go through this, and sometimes you look at it, selling it to a third party is easier, so why would you want to keep it within your family or internally? And
Yeah.
I mean, at least for us, it's the values that we have within the business. And it seems like all of my friends that have sold businesses over time, those values just kind of become the values of whoever the acquirer was. But, I'd be interested, Case, Pat, why do you want to keep it within your family?
Good, Case.
Yeah, so for our family, it's important for us to serve, and we feel like that we have this unique position in the hospitality industry where we do things differently because of our family values, and we have stated family values that we're all encouraged to call each other out on when we're not following family values. And I've had my kids call me out when I'm not, making the values work, and they see me missing the mark. So that's extremely important that we have those values, and that everybody in the family knows that they're real, and you should call out people. I think the best story through us going through our family values exercise was the value of courage was up on the wall, and it didn't get enough votes to make it into our top 7 family values. And one of my sons stood up and he said, "We will never make it through the next generation of family ownership if we don't have courage as a family value." And it's the courage to say what needs to be said, and the courage to accept that with an open heart and be able to respond to it in the right way. And if we don't have courage as a family to be able to take each other on in these really tough, important conversations about things like family values and why we're here and what we're here to do and who we're here to serve, then we have no chance of survival. So so that's it's extremely important, Fletcher, and you know, for us, I think beyond that, you know, there's a cultural thing. You know, you look at the culture of our country and what's happening to the culture of our country, and one of the big causes of what we see out there right now with this, you know, common sense being uncommon anymore and common decency not being common anymore is just a loss of values in our workplace too. I mean, people are commoditized, processes are commoditized, products are commoditized, and family businesses, as a general rule, do that better than non-family businesses. We care about people more, we treat people better, people are more important to us, and it makes a difference in our society and the fabric of our society. And for us as a family, we feel like that's important enough for us to go through the hard work to keep it in the family. So but it's harder. As you said, Sean, this is the hard part, and this is harder than, you know, selling it to somebody who just wants to take it and make money with it. So
Right.
Yeah, this is Mary, by the way, my oldest granddaughter. Say hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
So I love capitalism, but what I don't like is capitalism without morals. I can make a decent amount of money. I can pay my employees very well. We're a union contractor, and I've always been a big believer in a pension and healthcare for my employees. And so to me, it's capitalism with strong morals. Having in my case, a Christian ethic that says I'm going to take care of my employees and I'm going to treat them well. I'm going to be a servant leader. And family businesses tend to do that better than other companies, like Kay said. And so I want to be an example in my community that I'm going to care about my employees. I'm going to be morally strong, and I'm still going to make some money, people, and live a good life. And you can do that, and set the bar high in that sense. And my prayer is that my son and my nephew will continue that. I can't guarantee it. They were raised well, and we hope that's the case. But if it's all about money, then sell the business and get out of it.
Yeah, you know, one of the things too, I think, and when a privately owned family business sells, there's a real loss in the community. You know, I know that, you know, a lot of the organizations they support suffer. This, to a very large extent, illustrates it. But if you look at, for example, when Anheuser-Busch sold, take a look at like even at Royal Stadium. You know, they're not there anymore. I mean, they used to be a huge supporter of local sports, and they're no longer that. They used to be a huge supporter of all of the local charities. They're no longer doing that too. And I think when those businesses sell, when our businesses sell to third parties, a lot of those things go away too. So it's a real, and it's very important for us to be a big part of the community too. Our three values are God, family, and community come first. So, you know, we want to be here to serve our community. So, all right. Well, if there are there any questions? I'm not getting any questions. So any final comments as we wrap up here, guys?
Sean, I'll just mention one thing, and you touched on it, and it really ties into values, and that's the part of charitable giving. That's a really powerful tool as far as, you know, as you're transitioning the ownership of your business. And so again, you want to make sure you've evaluated, you know, again, what's the overall plans for the business, plans for the family, plans for your heirs. Look at the cash flow of all those, but also, you know, what are your charitable goals and initiatives, not only for yourself and for your family, and really have that be part of your planning process if you're so inclined, because obviously going to have a huge impact out in the community, but also could have some really large impact from a tax planning perspective.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Any other final comments?
I think two things. Number one is as we start the webinar, a takeaway, right? Let's talk about a takeaway. Well, what should we take away from this webinar? Number one is everybody's got 4 set of exit objectives. And so thinking about those today and in the future is the next step? How much longer do you want to work in the business versus own it? Who do you want to transition the business to? How do you want to see them demonstrate to you that they can take over ownership? And what are your expectations? And then also, how can you start to take a step back and allow them to make their own mistakes, trip and fall, and help pick them up and support them in the right direction? And how much cash do you need to get from the sale or transfer of your business to maintain your lifestyle? So those are three critical questions you can start asking yourself today. The second thing that I'll mention is we've written a book called Exit Planning, the Definitive Guide. And if you'd like to receive a copy, I'm happy to ship it to you. It's free, right? Complimentary of UMB. And so we're happy to send it out to you. If it helps you and you take something from it, then that's exactly what the intention is behind it. So
thank you. Yeah, it's an excellent book too. I've read that book. And I guess another takeaway that I would have is get started now. You know, don't wait. You know, the time to start is maybe 5 years ago, but you know, the soonest you can start is right now. Any other comments?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Sean. I think, you know, you have to get started and you have to stay committed to the process, right? It's a process and you have to commit to it and you have to take the necessary steps to keep it going. And I would say, just as a, you know, as somebody who's been in family business for 40 years and wants to see my family thrive for another 40 years, there's not much that's more difficult than doing what it is that we do, but there's not much that's more rewarding either. So you know, it's definitely worth the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say. And but you gotta work at it, right? It doesn't happen without real commitment to it and actively pursuing those objectives that you have, as Fletcher pointed out. So
yep, absolutely. All right. Well, with that, I will conclude this. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll follow this up. We have been recording it, so we'll follow this up with a recorded version. And if you want a copy of Fletcher's book, make sure you respond and we'll get that to you as well. So thanks a bunch and have a great afternoon.
thanks, Todd.
Take
All
care.
right. Bye.